Nat, if we wanted to go climb Everest, we could quit everything, and in 5 years we'd be on the top of that damn mountain. Yeah. There is no doubt in my mind.
Not
because
enough oxygen there for my life.
Welcome to PowrUp, a podcast full of insights for women that lead. Hosted by Nat and Kristen from Powrsuit, we're on a mission to amplify your impact as a leader. Join us each week and we'll share with you what's shaping our future from AI to Gen Z. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. We need more women in positions of power and influence, and Powrsuit is here to give you the skills, the knowledge, and the confidence to succeed in your career on your terms. I love what we're chatting about today, the power of yes. Nat, why don't you share a little bit on what we're going to dig into today?
This is kind of following quite closely from our third episode on imposter syndrome, because that opened a can of worms.
It did.
We have been in non-stop conversations for the last couple of weeks about crises of confidence and the difference between imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon, confidence, and how it all fits together. And we've had a fair bit of pushback as well on our grand claims that neither of us suffer from imposter syndrome.
We're too confident. We're overly confident.
We're too confident. And so that really sparked us to think, why? What makes us different? And what has led to us both sort of hand on heart being able to say, when we reflect on our lives, we probably haven't had it. So we thought today this was a good opportunity to share why.
Yeah.
What are the things that we've put in place? We don't suffer from this phenomenon that is so widespread. 80% of women experience it.
Yeah.
We are the 20%.
Yeah, I know. I think everyone is born with the same level of confidence. I'm just going to put that out there because I did read it somewhere.
Oh my gosh, you see little kids, you see little girls, and they just know they're a ballerina or a gymnast.
Exactly. Looking at our families or workplaces, this education system, it has effectively shaped or destroyed or built the confidence or lack thereof that we hold today. So we dug into what is it about us and what are some of the tactics that we and strategies that we use in order to build our confidence. And we want to share them today. We probably should do a caveat on the title, which is the power of yes, because we did an article on boundaries and saying no. So I think we need to be like,
we never said we wouldn't contradict ourselves.
I think there's a really big difference. And we like to say strategic yeses.
Yes.
And smart no's.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
We do like to say that now.
So smart no's, we go to the time wasting. It's not moving the needle in our lives. It's not developing our superpowers. It's just make work projects.
Oh, it's being the person that everyone goes to because they know you'll suck it up and do it. And I actually have a few friends who've experienced this, men and women, who, if, for example, working in an office where everyone has children, they somehow get lumped with all the work that no one else can do because they will have to leave, all that sort of stuff. And you just end up with a default yes. We don't want default yes. No. What do people say? It's either an F yes or a hard no.
Yeah.
If you're not, so that's, I think, what we're talking about.
And the strategic yeses are is what we're going to chat about today.
Because we don't swear. So we say strategic rather than
rather than F yes. But these are the yeses that will absolutely move you forward in life, in your career, in your personal life. And we need to practice saying yes, because all too often this confidence crisis that women are facing are not saying yeses. So we're going to just share 3 things, and we talked about it. And the first, I'll just share the 3 titles, Nat. I'm going to let you take the first one away. The first is that we get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So we'll have a little chat about that. We back ourselves to learn. We learn while doing. We know we can do it, and we're going to share how to do it. And then we focus on the upside opportunity. So those are the few things that we're going to discuss. Chat about being uncomfortable, Nat. When was the last time that you stepped out of your comfort zone?
Oh, you're going to ask me about the last time. I've been thinking about the first times.
Okay. Go, tell us some memorable.
Well, because I actually think when you talk about we all have the same confidence when we're born, I actually think maybe it's some of our earlier decisions that have led us to not suffer from imposter phenomenon.
Okay.
So just firstly, I actually think we should debate whether or not we are comfortable being uncomfortable or if we've raised our threshold, but we can get into that soon.
I'm uncomfortable being uncomfortable.
Everyone's uncomfortable being uncomfortable.
Just to clarify, we're forcing ourselves to be comfortable with that state.
Yes.
That feels meta.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Or the other way I think of it is you're raising your threshold for comfort or lowering
discomfort. Yeah, discomfort. No, you got it.
Yeah, so I think a lot of things, public speaking is one, that the progress has been smaller than I would have liked, but that initially I was so uncomfortable. Like, I would want to vomit if I had to go and speak in front of people. And while I don't think now I have too many less nerves, I definitely have I've embraced that discomfort. I'm used to that discomfort.
Love it.
And just being used to it makes me feel less uncomfortable, I suppose.
Yeah.
But some of
back to your early memories.
Yeah, the early memories. And I talk a lot now about the life escalator, which I miss the entry to that. And when we talk about the life escalator, it's that real traditional path in life that I did go to university. Often people then have an OE, they get into a relationship, they get married, they have kids, they have a career. I missed all those steps apart from the university one, and I didn't even really like university. I didn't realize that I was making a different path. Like, I didn't deliberately set out to do it, and I think very early on it was things like starting a business at university rather than getting a job, which now I can have as my CV, and it sounds very glamorous and it sounds like I am a high achiever, but at the time the social pressure to just go get a job was immense. And I think I don't want to say too dumb to realize it. I just don't think my parents had ever sat me down and said, this is the life escalator and you should do it. They just kind of left it, and so I didn't realize what I was doing was going against kind of the norm. And I think what's happened throughout my life is I've continued to do that, and everything that I have done differently has had a huge amount of pushback.
But you followed instinct, though, surely.
I followed instinct. Yeah. And one of the things I was mentally noting before we talked today is, so some of the big ones was starting a business, that being single. I was single for a decade from mid-20s, and a number of well-meaning people who were like, oh, you'll find someone, or
kids.
my favorite, my favorite was like, but you seem so nice. And I'm like, oh no, I'm actually a nightmare. And even the stigma around being single, and the number of times I get shoved in on the couch, or because the coupled people have the nice rooms and the single people were just meant to be lumped together, and yes, not having kids, and that when you're in your early 30s and people say, but you'll be so lonely, and how are you going to... That is an intense amount of pressure to put on someone. But every point along the way, that instinct thing is so correct. I knew I was happier because I'd just listened to a lot of these people complaining about their lives before they told me to follow their path, that I was happier. And I think what I've got out of that, because now I'm in a relationship, is that it's not the escalator itself, it's the not challenging it. And I think I just learnt very early, just by challenging it by accident, that things often turn out your own way, rather than sort of going down this path that felt pre-set up and finding that I was unhappy on it, which I think has been the experience of some other people. That's
what a lot of people probably would call the rat race and blah blah blah.
Yeah, which is very it wasn't on purpose for me. It just, I think when I think about my confidence now, it's just that I accidentally did all these different things, and they always sort of turned out. But what about you? Because we've led quite different lives.
Yeah, I feel like when I look back, first of all, I come from a long line of fierce women. So I do, I think we're probably born with the same amount of confidence. Mine was probably on the rebellion side of things. Like, my great-great-grandmother was one of the world's first women to vote in the world.
Amazing.
So she marched, and then my mum at the age of 60 sailed around the world on a sailboat. Like, just, I kind of come from this crazy family, and so maybe there's a genetic kind of thing of challenging status quo, but
just amazing role models.
Yeah, that must be it. There's just a sense of like nothing can hold us back. One thing I do credit my mum with is two things. One was mum put me in French school, and so I spoke French in school all the way up until university, and that was interesting because at home you speak English, and at school you're put in a situation that's very different, and you need to learn and adapt in a different language, which was kind of interesting when I think about now. And then the other thing was competitive sport. I was competitive. I wasn't pushed into it or forced to do it, but I was given the pathways to be competitive sport, and so I would line up. Well, gosh, I did kind of embarrassing sports, synchronized swimming and cross-country ski racing, which are cool in North America. You'll just have to trust me on this one. And I would line up around on races around people that ended up going on to the Olympics. And so I feel like I was surrounded in a really high performance environment of people pushing them. And when you're in sport, you learn how to hurt, you learn how to set goals, you learn how to lose, you learn how to crash out, you learn how to fail and not make the team. And I think these lessons of both, it was building resilience at school, kind of interesting, failing in a different language, of which you do a lot, but also maybe sport helped. And so I maybe developed that, but I did a gap year, so went traveling for a year by myself. That was pretty scary. And then went away to uni, and all these little steps I took that put me in situations where I was like, oh man, why am I not like drinking at university like everyone else? Or why am I not home nursing my newborn instead of living in a van driving around New Zealand with a 5-week-old? Like all these situations I get myself into, maybe out of stupidity, but like you just go with it. You're like, your instinct tells you to do something. Yeah. Do it.
Which is, I actually think it's quite, as you say that, one of the things that people love is non-parents giving parenting advice, so I'll do that now, is I actually read some research a while ago about one of the greatest gifts you can give your daughters is role modeling what you want for them.
Yeah.
And I think you obviously had a lot of that in your life where you got to see powerful women. Like, I wouldn't suspect there's a lot of mothers of your mum's generation who just sailed the world.
Yeah.
Like, and I do this a lot now. I mean, I'm not always looking my best, but I'll happily wear a bikini on the beach and jump into the water because there's that, there's those stats around the mums never do, and the dads do, and then girls as they grow older, they start to embody that same like, oh, I shouldn't do it because I haven't seen women do it. And I think we probably were both, and now I think about it, very lucky to have mothers who really role modeled doing things how they wanted to rather than what they should have done.
Yeah. And how you should act and how you should be.
So I wonder if we would, if we're talking about it goes, and I think the second part that you talked about there that I think I have written down some notes about is failure, and that failure is such a critical part of getting comfortable. And you talked about that a bit with language and landing overseas and sort of feeling like, oh my goodness, there's so much opportunity to fail. And I think doing life slightly differently, you fail more and you get comfortable failing more.
Yes.
And so you just sort of realize after a while that failure is not that scary. And I think a lot of us have this, well, I maybe not a lot, maybe I'm generalizing, but I feel like I've been in so many conversations with people who are afraid of what other people will think of them if they fail. And one of the examples I always give is dating. And the number of times I'll ask a single friend who's dating someone how it's going, and they reply with, oh, I'm not sure how he feels about me. And I'm like, that's not the question. And it just reminds me we spend so much time thinking about how we're perceived, and we are social creatures and all of that sort of stuff. But when you realize that no one's really thinking about you very much, and everyone prefers to hear the real story rather than the glossy one, you sort of give up on worrying about failing as well, and you just sort of go, oh yeah, I did this thing and it totally bombed out and it was painful, but I've dusted myself off and I'm going to try it again.
And you know what? When you walk onto stage, you know that's my biggest speaking superpower, is just being myself.
Yes.
There is something about people getting up there and thinking they all of a sudden have to embody somebody else, or even getting up and speaking in the workplace, you have to be this perfect human. Do you know it's the most endearing, charming, relatable
it's so
superpower
true.
is to just be yourself. And I know that when I get up there, I share my mistakes and all the stupid things I do, and people can get a real sense of Kristen. That's why people come and they want to hear and learn from people, is because they can get to know.
The mistakes are what make us.
Yeah.
And I was actually listening to a podcast on the way back from WOMAD. I've been at WOMAD all weekend. And that was Armchair Expert. And they were talking to Paul Rudd, who's like a famous actor. And he was talking about how he did Clueless and then gave up for a year to go and act on stage, and how ridiculous that felt at the time. But he was like, I want to form my path. But then they casually, him and another actor, got into a conversation about when were they turned down for a role. And I was like, oh, that's so invisible to us. And they just had countless stories, and they were actually joking about how they're like, just don't really focus on that part. And I was like, isn't that fascinating? Every famous movie star we see has dealt with so much rejection, and they were working at bars and restaurants, but you just see the famous part, and when you hear about them failing, you go, that's so much more interesting than this like surface life.
And the learning. And I know that on Netflix I've watched every single inspiring movie there is on people rowing around the world and sailing around the world and climbing all the mountains.
Mount Everest. When we first met, I was trying to make Kristen climb Mount Everest with me because I'd watched too many documentaries on it.
But there is something about pushing ourselves to the limits and watching and cheering people on that are doing it and why they're uncomfortable. We're inspired by that. So I think there's, we should take a step towards that, because there's something that draws us to these people that are trying and failing and trying and eventually succeeding.
Such good energy, right? And I think one tip that I have for getting comfortable being uncomfortable is, and I know it sounds like the opposite, but thinking about worst case scenario has always worked for me, because if I'm diving in to do something I'm really scared of, for example, even starting Hatch, I had a really thriving freelancing career. I was like cruising along and I was going to have to give it all up. And I stopped and thought, what is the worst case scenario? And the worst case scenario was I'd have to just build that business up again. And I went, well, if I throw everything at this and that's the worst thing that can happen, I'm fine with it. And I think that often has been my mantra when I'm throwing myself into the unknown of what's the worst that can happen. If I'm comfortable with the worst that can happen, just give it a crack.
And I know that I've had this before. When you feel a little bit scared in your gut, that's when you know you're doing the right thing. I think everyone should start something new, go to the class, you're the new person, walk into that networking room, take the job that you feel a little bit scared, because you will, the next time you do it, you feel a little bit less scared, I think.
I so agree.
But that fear, that feeling gnawing in your stomach, if you're feeling it, you're probably doing the right thing, and then take a step.
I think it really is a muscle, because I remember the first time I was at an event and I went alone, and I thought, and up until then it worked out really well, but I was like, I'm just going to break into this group and start a conversation, networking 101.
Isn't it awful? But it works out.
They rejected me.
Oh,
they completely rejected me. And do you know what was really funny about it is I thought my response, my worst case scenario, would be humiliation. Instead, I had to race to the bathroom, not to cry, but I was hysterically laughing because I just thought, what knobs? I was just like, what kind of idiot
that doesn't,
can
I just say that doesn't always happen. Those were horrible
people. That was the first time, not the first time I'd asked people, the first time and the only time that's ever happened. But it was the literal worst case scenario, and it was hilarious.
Yeah, good.
And I was like, all of these things that are scary, the more you do it and you have these failures and you have these weird things that happen, the less you actually care, because you're like, it's just one of 1,000 events rather than, and if it happens the first time, just send us an email. We'll laugh with you, because you don't want to be friends with people like that.
So being uncomfortable, embrace it. That little gut, that fear in your stomach, the thing that's saying, if there's alarm bells going off in the back of your head, just go for it.
And recognize, I love your point at the start to summarize that everyone has it. There's no such thing as comfort in that situation. Just get comfortable feeling that discomfort and look around and realize that anyone doing anything interesting is feeling that fear.
Absolutely. And they've just learned to overcome it. Hey, and the second one is you can learn while doing. And this one is a really important one, because we know that particularly women underestimate themselves. There is a stat, which actually I dug into a little bit last night, and that was from Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In, said that men apply for jobs or put their hands up when they know 60% of the thing, and women have to know 100. It's actually been a little bit debunked. It was a closed interview that she did at a company where they found that was at the company, and it's a stat widely used. So we're not going to use the stat. However, we do know that there's truth in it. We know that women like to know everything before they do something, so they don't fail, so they don't embarrass
60%,
themselves.
50%, 80%,
whatever it is.
We know we have a tendency
and we know we underestimate ourselves. And yes, men do too, but largely women do underestimate themselves, which hurts our career.
Do you think, just to challenge that, I don't know if it's necessarily underestimating. I think it's, a few people have talked to me about this recently, it's self-awareness of how little you actually know, and we're just uncomfortable with that.
I mean, you've congratulated people before on a work well done or project well done or achieving a raise or promotion. And what do women generally do?
Oh, yeah, they
oh, it's nothing.
Yeah, or put it down to luck.
Which to me, yeah. So I just feel like, I don't know if the right word is underestimating, but we're certainly not championing the great stuff we know and we've done.
And taking ownership. We take ownership very easily for the failures.
Yeah.
But we don't do it so well for the successes.
Yes.
I mean, there is, I think we have to be very aware that there is a lot of structural stuff in this, and no one wants to look arrogant. And I was actually just having a conversation about designers and how designers can't have arrogance, but they absolutely have to have confidence.
Yeah.
And it's such a balance to get right.
Well, and especially because we get gaslit as
Yes.
we are seen as aggressive or rude or whatever when we are ambitious women. But I think that you and I absolutely back ourselves to learn and to learn while we're doing something. So we don't need to step into something knowing everything. So what are some of your thoughts and memories on that?
I think, again, I look to failure, and I think I look at people like Canva. I like the example of Canva's founder who failed to get funding, what was it, like 100 times or something?
Yeah.
She went for venture capital funding to fund her idea and no one believed in it, like tens, if not hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And I always look around for those examples. I love, like you said before about listening to people's stories, I love hearing the stories of people having to work really hard. And in our newsletter this week, we're talking about Michael Jordan, and I was so excited to see that he was rejected from the basketball team at school, because you go, oh, okay, so that's someone who committed to learning. And the way I look at it, and I have had to do this a lot in my career, is change the question from can I do this to do I back myself to stay up all night if I have to, or take 5 times as long as I should to do it.
Yes.
And quite often we compare ourselves with people who are experts or people who are very good and go, I couldn't do it as well as them, as quickly as them. That's not the goal for me. The goal for me is to get it done. And so if I have to spend a week where it should take half an hour, I'll spend a week. I've got that time. I'll make that time.
Yeah.
So as soon as I change the question from can I do it to, well, how long will I take to learn it? It removes that fear and that emotion and that, is it me or not me? It's just like another task that I need to budget time for.
Yeah, and it's so funny that we know we can learn things, as evidenced by riding a bike. You literally have to bike and in order to learn to bike. Have you ever played an musical instrument?
Yeah.
I have not, but apparently you have to play the thing to learn to play the thing.
Yeah, it was boring.
Languages, you need to speak them to learn them. And so there is so much evidence that 100% of our listeners will have done one of those things. Probably witnessed someone else doing it. They might have had a mentor or coach, your dad or your mom running behind you, pushing the seat. And then you learned through trial and error and failure, following off. Ooh, not going to do that one. Iteration, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. So we all know we have this learning process, and it's weird, again, possibly learned behaviors, possibly some injustices that have happened through our lives or failures that felt real yuck. We stopped backing ourselves to learn when it comes to taking the promotion or putting our hands up for the project or whatever. Generalizing, of course. And so we know we can learn. If we look at, and this was from a really lovely sponsor of ours, someone we know who we view as kind of a bit of a mentor, and that's Ian Burns, an old CEO friend. And he's a real fan of saying there was IQ initially, and so that was the smarts that you had. And then we moved into this EQ, and that's how emotionally intelligent you are, and women have very high EQs. But there's also this thing called AQ, and that's adaptability quotient. And I think that's this learn while doing. Like, if you can put yourself into a situation, and like you said, I know I'll figure it out. It might be a little bit bumpy, or I might have to stay up late, but I know I can adapt to the situation and learn what I need to learn to learn. That's AQ. And I think that, like, we all have it. Women have it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was thinking as well in the car about the stereotype of mums going back to work. And I know there's so many mothers who really struggle going back, and they have a crisis of confidence, and we hear it all the time from people. And I just find it hilarious because I'm like, this is someone who's just come out of extreme adaptability. They have learned how to go from having no child to having someone completely responsible for reliant on them, and how to navigate two people's lives and a complete change if they're in a relationship, in that relationship, like all this amazing stuff that showcases adaptability, flexibility, and yet just society's really weird. I find society really weird. One thing I do think as you get older, and going back to that life escalator, is there sometimes feels like there's more to lose, which makes us struggle with learning a bit more. So I think one of the things that when we talk about our early years and how we sort of stepped outside the norm sometimes, which I actually think if everyone reflects, there will be times that they've stepped out of the norm and they will have done really well as a result, or bombed out and learned something really great, is that if you've gotten on a path at school, and like, I was meant to be a vet, so like I would have trained at university and I'd be so far into my career, and if I hated that career, the prospect of learning something new would feel like a huge amount of loss. Not just maybe taking a step down or across, but all that past effort I've put into it. So what do you think about that? Like, because I actually think, especially when you're in probably your 20s on to your 40s, that you have this sense of I've built something, and starting again can feel really scary. Yeah.
We'll go into upside and risk in the third and last kind of strategy. But I do think that I have become comfortable with being the beginner in the room, and that's an ego check at the door. Like when you start anything new and you walk into a situation and you don't belong, you have checked your ego at the door. You're like, you know what? I'm going to be a heck of a better person and a more interesting person and have a more fulfilled life if I do that. So I often find that I am the most curious person in the room, and that's how I learn. You know, when you go into meetings and people throwing around the jargon, and people have their own language, they've closed themselves off to learning anything new because they have to seem like experts, and maybe they are great. It's like their identity's wrapped up in being an expert, whereas my identity is wrapped up in being a bit of a beginner, and I'm okay with that. And I just find that a much more fulfilling life.
And I don't know if it's necessarily your identity is being a beginner, but your identity is being someone who learns. And I think the example about jargon...
But you do feel silly, because you walk into rooms of subcultures and you feel silly not speaking that, right? But like you do.
You do feel silly. Oh, it's funny, because I don't think I do feel silly. But the reason I don't is two things. One, a piece of advice I got really early on from someone I really admired who said... I think we were talking about being on boards, and he just said, be the person who asks the dumb questions, because you'll be shocked at how many times people don't know the answers to them.
But you're just not allowed to preface it with, this is a dumb question.
No, I'm not allowed to say that anymore.
Dumb question. I'm like, Nat, don't do that, because it's actually not. Off.
But I do think the number of times I found myself asking what I would consider a dumb question because I don't know the answer, and get faced with a bunch of blank stares from people who've been happily talking in jargon for the last 20 minutes. And one of the things I think we learnt at Hatch, which again gives me confidence, is that people use jargon when they really don't know what it means. Like most people, I always say there's two types of people in the world and use completely different examples each time. But I think if your motivation going into the meeting or into the project or into the job interview, it can be one of two. And it is that thing of, I'm here to learn, I want to improve myself, I want to add value, or I want to show off how much I know, or display how much I know. And if you fall into that second camp, it's worth questioning why, because I feel like you add so much more value asking questions. Yeah,
I agree. That's the mindset going in, is I'm here to learn. But I think they're paying you to learn. And that's the adaptability quotient. Like, people are hiring you because you have broad set of skills. You can pick things up. You've proven it because of X, Y, Z. And they're paying you for that.
That's so true. No one wants you to stay in the same place. No. You get promoted because you're now gone from one place to the other.
When you're bored or if you're feeling held back, you've outgrown the role. Like, you need to go learn something new.
And I definitely think it goes back to that same thing of being really comfortable, not having to put on a front to the world. To just be like, this is who I am. Obviously, you don't want to be a meanie or anything, but this is who I am. I'm here to learn, I'm here to add value, and getting away from that confidence thing that makes you think everyone in the room's looking at you, judging you, and pushing outward and thinking, how do I add value? Well, it might be asking what the acronym means, or it might be raising your hand when something doesn't make sense, or it might be signing up to do a project that you don't feel comfortable with, or a job that you don't know everything for. all of those things are actually expected of you,
Yeah,
rather
I
than
agree.
being a huge
But you know,
risk.
one tactic have had to do, which is a little bit cheeky, I've had to sell that I can do it, even though I have never done it.
Well, but
And
then
I've got almost every single job in my life by being like, oh yeah, absolutely, I know how to do that, or I can do that. Meanwhile, furiously learning at night how to be a content marketer or whatever. And I think I had to sell that I could do it because I knew I could.
Well, you're selling that you can.
Exactly.
You're absolutely, because I think that
So it's
goes
a
back
little
to
bit
that
cheeky.
first thing of the question for me is how long is it going to take me to learn, rather than whether
That's
or not
right.
I know how to do it. Because
Exactly.
I've learned enough things in my life
Yeah.
now to know it's just going to be a matter of how much time I put in.
Exactly.
And who I can, again, reaching out to your networks, who I can shoulder tap to say, could you just give me the cheat sheet to this?
That's a huge part of learning, is reach out to your networks. They'll open their networks because it's highly likely you'll be able to chat to someone who's done exactly that. Yeah.
And I think
Shortcut
I've
the
had
learning.
the same example as well of being in a project. I was a consultant and they said put together a Gantt chart, like flippantly. And I was like, I've never heard the word Gantt chart before. I don't know what it is. So I quickly called someone going, could you just tell me what a Gantt chart is? And I sat down for a 20-minute session with them writing out a Gantt chart. And
Now,
I was like,
you are a Gantt chart queen.
well, no, I hate Gantt charts, but I learned how to do it for that project. So.
Yeah, that's right. Imagine holding yourself back because of silly things like that.
Yeah, but not knowing what you're doing.
I love it. Now, you had alluded to the fact of like what I thought about how to overcome that feeling of risk, because as we get older, you're right, we have safer bets. We've got families or mortgages or financial dependence, whatever.
And those are legit.
They are legit. And so I would say I have a high risk appetite for taking on new opportunities. Not everyone does, but I think our
also,
third
can
point,
I say we've built up quite good safety nets. Like we are,
Yeah.
I think that gives us, I think it is always worth saying, if we were working in jobs that were paying minimum wage, we would not be able to take the same
No,
risks
you're
as we have
right.
now.
You're right. But I do think anyone at any stage in life should do this third strategy, regardless of the safety net, because I just think the risk and the upside. Now, I'm not talking about silly risks, but the third thing is focus on the upside opportunity, rather than the downside risk.
Excellent.
And I think anyone in any stage of life can and should consider this, and smart opportunity. So, I mean, do you want to dig into any thoughts there?
Yeah, so focusing on the upside, and the reason I say we have built a safety net is I think the more safety net you have, the more, and I think that's psychological. I think it's proving to ourselves that we can do it. I think it's also
Yeah, true.
financial,
Yeah.
knowing, and maybe that's that worst case scenario thing as well, of going, if I was to take this risk and try this thing and it didn't pan out, I'm not setting myself up to have a huge terrible thing happen in my life. Like,
Yeah.
I think I just wanted to get that criteria across.
Yeah.
So I'm terrible at this, and I only realized I was terrible at it in a conversation the other day, that I don't think I spend nearly enough time focusing on the upside. I think because I do this, what's the worst case scenario, I think about that. I think about all the different, maybe it's down to biology. Back in the day, we had to think, when we were living in caves, we had to worry about all the predators and all the things that could go wrong, and my brain hasn't
You're
caught up
amalgata.
yet.
How do you say it?
Amalgama.
Your fight or flight.
Yeah,
the thing at the base of your brain.
I think
you
it's
go
true
there.
not saying it right. I think I
Mine
do.
must be missing.
But I actually don't know if I realized that I wasn't thinking about it. And it was only when I challenged myself to just sit down and think, what if it all goes right? I was like, oh yeah, I've never, I don't actually sit down and visualize it. But one thing I do, because I think I should throw back to you to talk more about how to do that, because you are much better at it than me, is I have always, I've lived by the quote when I first heard it until now: you're the average of the 5 people closest to you.
Yes.
And
love
so
that.
for me, it's not so much about visualizing, although now I'm actually still challenging myself to work on it. It is being really aware of who I'm hanging out with and what influences I have. And I have noticed this, where there have been times where I've been surrounded by people who are quite negative. And in those times, I do feel like the risks that I'm taking and the things that I want to do feel more risky.
Yeah.
Whereas when I'm surrounded by people who are also challenging themselves and who are taking things on, and I can see it work for them, I can see that upside a little bit more. And so I think Girls That Invest, which is a New Zealand podcast, but they've gone global, they talk about investing, and one of the things that they did before they started a podcast was surround themselves with people who podcasted. And so they just felt like, oh, it's perfectly normal for people to podcast. Everyone's doing it. It'd be stupid not to do it. And that's something that I think I have done in place of visualizing, is always surrounded myself proactively with people who inspire me, because I can see how I could be successful because they all are.
Yes.
So I think, but I haven't done the visualization, or I'd like to hear more from you about how you do it, because I know you do, because you've told me to do it a few times.
Yeah, well, I don't see barriers when I think of opportunities. I learn them the hard way when I get into it, and then I have all sorts of crises. But when I'm first presented with an opportunity, my brain goes to the absolute best case scenario. It always has. I'm like, if that person's done it and that person's done it, like, I can do it.
Yeah.
100%. And so I just go to, my life is full of opportunities that, Nat, if we wanted to go climb Everest, we could quit everything, and in 5 years we'd be on the top of that damn mountain. Yeah. There is no doubt in my mind.
Not
because
enough oxygen there for my life.
You can carry oxygen with you.
I
these
know.
days.
I've watched the documentaries.
Look, there is nothing that the human condition, our bodies, with hard work, we're intelligent people. There's literally nothing in our way. So when someone's presenting me with an opportunity, I'm like, of course it's going to be the best, and we are the best people for it.
Yeah, that's like, because I kind of do partially that. Like, I just say yes without thinking. Like, I default to yes. I'll be like, absolutely, I can do this. But I don't actually spend the time to then think, how great would it look if it all panned out? Yeah. And I think that was the light bulb moment to me. It's like, I found myself in very similar situations to you, of like, I've said yes and now I've got to figure out how to do it, and like all the time.
Yeah.
But that feeling, like, I just feel there's something extra that I can gain from spending much more time visualizing it all going well, rather than planning for it all going different ways that I have to manage, because I'll figure them out when I get to them.
When I think of the world leaders and all these people that are running companies and countries, 90% are men, and probably the majority of them are kind of mediocre. So we're in a world that we've sent people to the moon, and we've
built skyscrapers,
and
reclaimed land. These are all
rode across oceans. I mean, we are capable of everything, and I mean, gosh, we're so much more capable than a mediocre man. So I just go straight to, we're going to build $1 billion business. Why not us? We're amazing. And we'll just figure out all the hard stuff as we go. So I go straight to the upside.
Well, yeah.
And yeah.
I think as well, for me, the experiment I was telling you about the other day that I did recently with applying to speak at a conference, I think I've talked about it on a previous podcast. Spoiler, did not get it. But what I found was really interesting was it was such a positive experience, because it was my test run of imagining what if it all went well.
Yeah.
So we'd planned this whole trip to Canada. We were going to stop in New York and see some people. We were like, this is going to be the future of how we live. We're going to like get these jobs, and we're going to travel the world together. And then when it didn't happen, it wasn't the devastating blow I expected. Because, you know, I've always lived like, don't get your hopes up, all that stuff we talk about when it's like somehow tricking ourselves into not getting our hopes up. Instead, I just had this week of extremely positive experience thinking about what if it all went well. So I'd actually, like, anticipation is half the enjoyment. It actually was. I got all that positivity, whereas normally I'd be like, it probably won't happen. And by the time it doesn't happen, the whole thing has just been one big bundle of negativity.
You're never going to do it again.
Yeah, and so in the end, even not getting it really was like water off a duck's back, because I'd had so much joy out of planning, and now we're actually like, we'd moved on from that one thing into how would our lives look if we started to do this? So it actually was a success regardless.
Oh, well, that's great. And I have been disappointed when I haven't gotten things before, but I always, if I put my hand up or take that step, I do think, what could I lose if I don't say yes? So it's often looking in your current situation, your current role, your current life, and then it's envisioning the new thing, which I just go big, because yes, it's going to be big, and you're like, wow, well, I'd want to step into that and out of this, and so what, you know, I don't get that unless I do
this.
It.
And I think that with going back to that, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, I don't think either of us is saying we're just happily going through life, making mistakes, failing, and going do. We don't, like, I feel the pain. Like, I feel the pain of failing. I have felt miserable and like a failure and all those awful emotions. But what I've gotten more comfortable with is they're just emotions, and it's just a response to something not going the way I wanted it to. And that's actually okay. I can feel that feeling. I can feel sad. but then next day, next week, pick yourself up. Like,
I
try
love it.
again.
I am learning. I'm learning that.
Up and try
2023
again.
goals, in addition to a 6-pack or a 4-pack, I'll take any of them.
She's downgraded her goal. She's downgraded.
Okay, no, 6-pack, envision it. Manifest it. I would like to be less moved, and sorry if this is an aside, but I want to be less driven by my emotion, because that's when I have the crises. Because when I see an opportunity, I'm like, yes, it's going to be amazing. But when you have a bad day, you're like, oh, this is also bad. And so I want to be less driven by that.
Oh, nice.
It's a roller coaster of Kristen's
Although
emotions.
I do think we should feel our emotions.
Okay.
I love feeling
I just don't want to
emotion.
make decisions on them.
I think it's that harnessing them, right? Because
Yeah.
I think we both feel, well, everyone feels things very strongly, but it's that how to separate emotion. And sometimes it can just mean sleeping on it.
Yes.
Or chatting to someone. But I agree, making decisions based on emotion is not always the smartest idea.
So those are our 3 strategies. We have gotten comfortable with being uncomfortable, but you build your resilience to it just like a muscle. We know we can learn. Everyone can learn. We've proven it. There's facts that back that we can learn. You are getting paid to learn to do incredible things with new projects and new roles. And then we focus on the upside. Granted, we do measure risk and stuff, but initially don't let yourself go there.
Yeah.
What if everything went right?
We won't always keep that as part of the equation.
So we are going to, the action that I would like to share is, we talked up top about strategic yeses and smart nos. I think it's really important for people to identify what's strategic. And I think the only way you can do that is, what are your goals? What are your objectives? So what is it this time next year? You know, what do you envision for yourself? What do you want to have learned? What will you be doing? That's anything that gets you closer to that.
And
is
that's
strategic.
almost that third step, right? Is visualizing it all going well.
Yeah. Yes.
Where do you want to be?
That's right.
And
So
just for
do
people like
that.
me who get stressed out about the size of that task, is, for me, often it's one thing in a year. Like, by the end of the year, I would like to, the beginning of this year, I was thinking, be able to work and live remotely for a month. Like, if I can achieve that one thing, or it might be changing or learning a new thing. Like, you don't have to think about every single part of your life. Just think about one thing.
Yeah.
You can visualize being in that position
and
in
the
a year's time.
power of yes should get you closer to that. And things that are going to slow you down and burn you out, those are the no's. So that, I think that's the action to take away, is to figure out what are you going to be doing this time next year, so that you can put some of these things into practice.
Love it.
Yeah. So check us out on Powrsuit.com. That's where you can sign up to our incredibly insightful weekly newsletter for free.
You're really selling it.
I am. And
Which is actually, just for everyone, because the podcast is quite new, we're starting to try and dabble with the idea of making them work together. So we recognize you might be out listening to us while you're walking or cleaning or whatever, which makes it very hard, as we had feedback on this week, to action anything. So we want to make sure that the newsletter is almost that follow-up as well, so that there's more tangible things people can do as a result, so you don't have to sort of write mental notes as you're listening, if of course we say anything intelligent enough for you wanting to write notes about.
Yeah. No, I love it. And let us know if it's working. We're trying new things. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll catch you all soon.